Welcome to Bow Hunting Pressure to Whitetails. My name is Jake Cornish. I'm your host. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to find big buck producing properties on public land and private land in highly pressured states. Hope everybody's doing really good. I'm doing pretty good. It's the weekend. Actually, it's not even quite the weekend. It's Friday. The weekend starts tomorrow. But I was able to get out and do a little bit of walking around in the woods. Just super therapeutic, especially this time of year in the springtime, where it just seems like I can never get enough time out in the woods because I've been cooped up all winter. And so, yeah, I was able to go out and take a look around, and right now I'm really got my eyes glued to the ground because I'm finding some sheds. If you're listening to this, obviously you won't be able to see these, but for all the people watching on YouTube's, I'm holding up a shed that I found on one of my leases, and it's probably like a 2.5-year-old, but a very incredible 2.5-year-old antler, in my opinion. Pretty cool. And then I went out to another lease that I had, and I was walking that, and it was really tough to try to look for sheds. In this first lease where I found this one antler, it was beans, and so you could look for, a few hundred yards and easily see something like this laying out in the beans. We didn't even actually find anything in the bean field. I don't know if hopefully no one trespassed over there and already shed hunted. I mean, it's a possibility. It looked like there could be some trespassing issues there, but yeah, we actually found this shed beside a sapling tree, and it looked like there was a bed there, and the sapling tree was all rubbed up. So I think this buck was bedding there, and he just dropped it right there in his bed, which is really cool. But I went out to this other lease that we had, and it was corn this past year, and I was walking that, hoping to find something, and it got pretty disappointing pretty fast because I was covering a lot of spots that I was assuming there'd be bucks feeding in. They were just areas where the deer were congregating and coming out into the corn, and I was walking them, kind of grid searching them and everything. And it was a little tricky in the morning because the sun was coming up, and so I don't know how much shed hunting that you've done in the morning, but I realized really fast that if I'm looking towards the sun, I can barely make out anything in this cut cornfield. Like the stalks and everything were just glistening, and there was just so many shadows. But if I looked the other way with the sun to my back, it was like absolutely perfectly illuminating the field to where you could easily spot an antler. So I had to get a little bit creative, and I had to start walking the fields in a certain direction so that I was constantly having the sun on my back where I was looking. So I was doing that a lot, and the sun got pretty high. It was kind of late morning. Got towards the end of my walk on that field, and I got to this one corner where the bucks come into the property a lot off this corner from the neighbors, and I looked out and I saw some tines sticking up, and I found this antler right here. And just a basic 4-point antler, but it had a really cool kicker at some point coming off the G2, almost like a split G2. It would have been a split G2, looks like, and that got busted off probably in velvet or shortly after he shed. But pretty cool antler. It looks like, I think the buck that it came off of was at least 3.5, maybe 4.5. I'm not sure. I'm kind of airing towards 3.5, but just an absolute stud of a 3.5-year-old. So I was elated nonetheless to find this. And then, of course, when you find an antler, the first thing that you think is the other side close by. So I was like, well, I'm gonna look. So I started searching and walking across this corner, and then I started walking down the fence line. I looked into the grass, and I found the other side. And this side does have the kicker on the G2. So he had matching kickers off his G2. And, as he stands right now, he's probably maybe pushing 130. The only way he is because these main beams on him are really long. And he's got some pretty decent freaking girthage around his bases. He's got some pretty nice bases. But as far as his tine length is really not much to speak of. But nonetheless, a freaking nice set of antlers, just especially when you're talking about finding a matched set. Like, I've never even found a shed this big to begin with, much less find a matched set. So to find these antlers, it was super cool. I did have pictures of this buck. I knew which one he was. He was kind of random. He came in right towards the end of season, and I never really had any summer pictures of him, never had any rut pictures of him. And then I got a couple appearances where he just kind of showed up out of nowhere, and apparently he decided to come back and drop his antlers over there. So that was super cool. My dog Willow's chilling out here in the garage with me, so if you hear any huffing and puffing, that would definitely be her. But just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm looking for when I'm trying to find properties here in Michigan that have the potential to hold some good deer. And by good, I mean like deer that are 4.5 years old and older, like good mature deer. Because I mean, honestly, you can grow 3.5-year-olds about anywhere in this state. It's not too terribly hard to do. I got 2 of them sitting here on my table that I shot this past year, and I would have loved to kill something a little bit bigger, but sometimes you just are like, well, this is what it is. And beautiful bucks, but yeah, trying to find areas in Michigan to grow older, bigger deer. And it can be really, really challenging. But I wanted to kind of talk about what I've learned over the years and what's helped me become successful on public land, trying to get on deer that are older, and then also on private land. Like what are some things to think about if you're considering asking permission and trying to get more hunting property? Like where do you even start? Like, and then when it comes to leases, like what do you look for in a lease? Because that can be a whole nother ball game. But I think that you can have success in each of those quadrants very easily. Quadrant's probably not the right word. That means 4. So I guess I'll just start with public land because that's kind of where I started in my hunting journey. It was public land. Leasing never was really anything I thought about. Wasn't anything I was aware of. I didn't even really I didn't even know there was websites out there that had leases on them. And so it wasn't ever anything that crossed my mind. But I was like, you know what? I don't know jack squat, and I need to at least get one big buck kill under my belt. That was my whole mentality going into hunting public land. And it was kind of like I'm gonna forcibly put myself into this torturous situation. Pretty much is what it was, because I grown up hunting private land farms pretty much all my life, and that's kind of where everything started for me. So I kind of got a start on kind of an easier playing ground, so to speak. And it was farmland, and like I killed quite a few deer out there doing that, but I just got really used to doing the same old thing, which is I had my spots, I had my stands, and I just went and I hunted them. And I really didn't learn a whole lot, surprisingly. Like, looking back, like, I made so many dumb mistakes. Like, if I went back and hunted that same farm that I grew up hunting now, I would do things 100 million times different, just because I look at stuff way differently when it comes to access. Where do I put my scent on the ground? Where am I not? How am I setting up on trails so that I'm not, crossing them and with the wind and everything? And it's just like, it would be totally different ball game. But that is where I started out, and I just kind of, I had the easy life for a little while. But I had this desire, probably inspired by the Whitetail Adrenaline guys. Honestly, that's where it all started, was watching those Whitetail Adrenaline DVDs. And if you're not familiar with them, what the heck are you doing? Like, are you living under a rock? Because they're pretty freaking awesome, and they kind of pioneered the whole public land craze, in my opinion, for a lot of guys. And I remember watching those DVDs and just like kind of my mind just blew, because I didn't even realize that what they were doing was possible. Like, I think with the type of media that was out at that time, the whole like farm bucks and food plots and everything was huge. Like TV shows were huge. And so that's kind of like what everybody's dream was like, I got to have a food plot. I have to have a farm. I have to do this and do that. And to the point where like guys didn't really even know how to hunt big bucks, and they were just kind of like gravitating to these things that were always pushed at them through sponsors and TV and whatnot, to the point where it was a little ridiculous, where you'll have a guy that has like, a couple acres and barely has any cover to hold any deer, and he's like, I'm gonna make a food plot, and he's like tore his woods down, he has a food plot out there, and then like lo and behold, 5 years later he gives up on it because it's not doing what he wishes. It's because that through the media that we were consuming, we all had this imaginary situation in our head, and I get caught doing this a lot too, where it's like you see a field, you see an inside corner, and you're like, oh man, like if I sat up in a tree stand in that inside corner, this big buck would just come out, cut the corner behind it, chasing a doe, and I just get this sick shot, 20 yards, like it'd be so cool. And like you almost create these ideas in your head of what's going to happen. And that's pretty much what guys were doing. And that's what I was doing. And just kind of, because that's all we were consuming. There wasn't any hunting, there wasn't any public land hunting content out there. And I think when public land content kind of hit the scene, it just, it was a really well-needed wake-up call, in my opinion, for me especially, because it made me realize, number one, this thing that was like frowned upon and that everyone was just like, oh, public land is terrible. Like that was kind of the assumption, like all around, public land is terrible. And I first of all, I realized all public land is not terrible. There's some public land out there that actually has big bucks in it, which is crazy. And that part blew my mind. And then the next thing that was a good wake-up call for me is that the tactics that I have grown up using and that I have always believed in might not be the only way to get it done. And there might actually be other ways of going after these big bucks that's smarter, and that there's other guys out there that are actually better hunters than me because they're taking on this challenge and they're being successful. And if they can do it, then why can't I do it? Because the only thing that's different between them and me is me going out and doing it. Like when you bring public land into the equation, it takes away all the barriers between you and that person that you're watching on TV. Whereas before, you'd watch a show and you would be like, the only thing you could think of is, man, if I only had what they had, I need that land, I need that food plot, I need this, I need that. And that's what you would strive to do. But with public land, all that got stripped away. Like even to the extent with, the whitetail adrenaline guys, like they didn't even have cool bows and cool camo. Like it was sponsor free. And they were just like, yeah, we're not even going to do that. And you're like, well, how the heck are you killing these things? Like, you don't got the newest, coolest stuff, like, like what is going on here? And so you realize like, oh, it has nothing to do with all this stuff that we want. It has nothing to do with these food plots and everything. It's like, these guys are going out in there and they're learning the land. They're learning what these big bucks are doing just based off of what's going on. And they're just stepping into this equation that's already happening. They're stepping into this circle, this whitetail mechasphere that's going on, and they're reading it and they're learning about what's happening, and then they're taking and basing all of their actions and their moves off of what they are seeing out there in the woods. And so that made me realize, like, all right, I need to up my game big time. And that's kind of where the whole push for me to start hunting public land happened. Also, I lost permission on that farm that I grew up hunting. It ended up changing hands. And kind of a weird situation because back in the day, I didn't have Onyx or anything. So I never got updates on, the landowner names and anything like that. Like nowadays, you pull up Onyx and it's like if somebody buys a piece of property, you probably know within the next year because it refreshes and everything. But back in the day, I mean, I had no clue how to do any of that. Like I remember when I first started getting into the whole mapping stuff, I was pulling up people's actual tax info on county records and stuff, like crazy stuff. And if you're, older than 18, you probably know what I'm talking about. But so like that piece just kind of, it changed hands. I didn't realize it. The other guys that we were hunting it with us never realized it because the guy we got permission from never told us. And partly because he still technically had the rights to give us permission, and then the people that bought it decided like, oh no, you don't have the rights anymore, and it kind of turned into this big old fiasco. And essentially they came and told us like, hey, you guys don't have the permission anymore to hunt this, so you need to pull all your stuff out. So I remember going and pulling all my stands out, and man, talk about a heartbreaking kind of situation where it's like, all this spot that you've put so much time and effort into is gone, and you just feel like you lost years of your life almost. And I think the worst part of it for me was that I had no idea what to do next, and that's when you know that you need to get off the couch and go learn. Because if you were to lose your farm right now, like if you were to lose your number one spot, that spot that you have all your confidence in, like what are you going to do? And like, could you go within within that next season and be able to set yourself up in any spot? Like give you the whole things, all the options are open, like money or no money. Like, do you feel like you could go from losing everything to getting yourself in a situation where you can get yourself on a nice mature buck that season? And at that point, there's no heck in the way that I felt comfortable or confident doing that. And so I had to turn to public land because that was the only thing I had at the point. I did have some small permission pieces, but they just never had any good bucks on them. And I was like, well, I don't want to spend my whole season trying to shoot a little forky. I want to try to find a good buck. And so public land was my option. And so I decided to go after that. And I ended up killing my first public land buck, which is on the channel. It's a huge deer. I shot it with a gun, and it's like a 148-inch 9-pointer. One of the biggest deer I had on camera the whole time. And so once you kill one, you realize, oh man, this is doable. And it's kind of a weird psychic thing that happens. Like once you have this thing that you felt like was never possible, whatever it is. Could be anything. For me, it's building a house someday. And it's just like, if you've never done it before, then of course it seems impossible. Of course it seems overwhelming. But then once you get one under your belt, then it's like, all right, like I can replicate that. Like I know what I did that got me that success. So I'm going to take that and double down on it. And so for me on public, it was scouting time and trail cameras. It was getting intel. It was intel. And my buddy makes fun of me for it all the time, and because I say it so much. And every time he listens to a new video, he goes, I know what you got to do to get big bucks. You just got to have the intel. But it's so freaking true, because I spent so many hours and walked so many miles looking at tons of public land, to the point where, I was looking at everything. So it's like you at some point you're going to have to be like, okay, what are my top 4 spots? Well, it's really easy to narrow them down to 4 or 3 pretty good spots if you've walked, a crap ton of land. If you only go into a couple spots, then of course, like, you're probably not going to have great luck. But I scouted a ton, and then I started out with only like 4 cell cams, and I bought 4 more, because those 4 that I had gave me a lot of really useful intel on those spots that I had scouted. My top 3 spots, I put cameras in all those, and I got a lot of really good intel. It ended up leading to us killing some good bucks. So I knew that also was a system that was working really good for me. So I doubled down on the trail cameras. So that's kind of the story of my road to success on public land. It was mainly an intel game, but there was a lot of thought and reason that went into choosing the state game areas that I wanted to target. And, I would say some of them that I started targeting did not pan out. And so I guess I'll just go over some general things that you want to look for when you're trying to find big bucks. And it applies across the board. no matter if you're trying to find a lease or you're trying to figure out what public land that you want to go and target, or if you're trying to figure out like, hey, I don't even know where to start for asking permission. I haven't seen any like Boone and Crockett, bucks feeding out in any fields that I specifically want to try to go after or anything like that. I'm just looking for some general permission. Like, where do I even start? Like, there's so much land around me. Like, what would even be a good strategy for determining an area to look at? So, first of all, you have to understand, like, big bucks in general, they need age and nutrition to reach their maximum potential. So depending on your area, nutrition can be relative. It could be that maybe you just have a lot of hardwoods and they're eating acorns. So, you just kind of have to look at it with what you got. If you got ag, obviously, big corn, big beans, all that kind of stuff, deer are going to be getting a lot of nutrition out of that. They're going to be feeding in that stuff a lot. If you're in an area that has a lot of clear cuts, that's a huge, massive feeding central area for deer. So they need that, and they need age. So it's really easy to be like, oh, of course they need age. You got to have a big buck. If a big buck's going to get big, he's got to get old. And that's true. So at what point? So what's your criteria, I guess? Because if you want to just kill a 3.5-year-old buck, I'd say that you could probably manage to pull that off just about anywhere, because if you hunt an area that is very hunter dense and there's a lot of properties and they're all split up, even in those kind of situations, which I would consider the worst kind of situations, you're still going to find 3.5-year-old deer, because even normal hunters, even if you have a lot of them, are willing to pass on a 2-year-old buck to kill a 3-year-old buck, just because the pure size of the antler just blows up between 2 and 3 years old. But I would say in general, what you want to look for to try and find deer that can make it past the age of 3.5 and 4.5 even, and 5.5, is you need to find areas that where they just can't get shot. They can't just get shot every single year. And believe it or not, I'm sure you'll believe it if you're hunting a pressured state, is that there are areas where deer get shot every year. Like, there's a reason that there's some areas that are only holding bucks that are, the biggest ones of 3.5-year-old deer, is because they get shot. Like, that is the top tier buck, and hunters are allowing those deer to get up to that age. But then once they hit 3.5 and they're sporting a really nice looking rack, then they're a target animal. And if you have that many hunters around in the area, somebody's going to shoot it, and it's just a matter of who. Like, it's going to walk across the property line, boom, dead. And that's where you get a lot of frustrations, especially in, states, even states like Ohio and stuff, where it's like, if you got bad neighbors, or you got neighbors that are not on the same page as you, and you have smaller parcels and stuff, it's like you can do as much passing of 3.5-year-olds or 4.5-year-olds that you want, and it won't make a huge difference, because the neighbors are just going to shoot them. And so when I'm looking for a spot to target, I'm usually looking for large parcels. And if I find like a piece of public and there's a bunch of small parcels all butting up against it, lots of individual houses, or it's more in town, like it's more closer to the city, well, then you got two things going bad for it. Number one, you got a huge amount of people that are within short driving distance. What you doing, Willow? You got a ton of people that are around that are going to target that spot because you're close to a city or whatever. Plus you have the neighbors where all these deer are walking onto their property, so there's a higher chance that they all get shot too. So I'm trying to find areas that are far away from human populations, like large amounts of people. And so usually what that means is I have to drive farther. And that's just something that I've kind of committed to being willing to do, because I want to chase that top tier buck, that higher end buck. I want to go after 4 or 5-year-old deer, 6-year-old deer. And quite frankly, I don't think it's even possible in some of these areas where you got a lot of neighbors, a lot of small parcels. I think that these bucks are just getting shot. And I'm not saying it can't happen, because if you have a bunch of neighbors that are all on the same page, of course they can all, pass these deer and let them get older, and stuff can happen. You can get those, those co-ops or whatever going on, and that's super cool. But how would you know based on just simply hopping on Onyx? You don't know what any of those areas are. So I'm targeting areas that are away from cities. They're far away from people, and generally that means that you're hunting more large tracts of land anyways, so in turn the parcel sizes do get bigger, and then you're dealing with less owners, which means less hunters and less opportunities for these deer to die. So if you're on Onyx and you're looking down and you're like, all right, well, I know I want to avoid these cities, I know I want to go and target kind of this area because it has larger parcel sizes, it's got food, it's got cover, there's a lot of ag in this area, and by cover, don't think woods. Okay, so like when I say it's got food and it's got cover, I don't mean I need to find an area that has a bunch of fields and a bunch of woods, because woods doesn't always equal cover. Sometimes woods equals the exact opposite thing of security cover, because sometimes they're open so the deer don't even really feel comfortable bedding in them, or they're hunted because hunters love hunting woods, and so they just become these no man's zones for big bucks that they just completely avoid the woods until after dark. And I've seen this multiple times. So when I'm talking about food and cover, I'm talking about like thick, nasty stuff that bucks will bed in, and it could be anything. It could be a nasty fence line. It could be a swale in the middle of a cornfield or a bean field that's got thick grasses in it, and it's so small that most people would overlook it. It could be literally anything. I've seen deer just bed in the middle of corn. If there's not any better cover, sometimes they just bed in the middle of the corn. But it's going to be somewhere where they feel safe and they're not getting hunted. So you need to have that cover and you need to have that food. So I'm usually looking for areas that have a lot of ag in the area, because I know they're in general going to produce bigger bucks, and I'm looking for that large parcel size. So once I've found those areas, then you're starting to target a few spots. So if you're looking at public, you're only going to have a handful of areas that are going to be public within those types of places. So say you've got 4 public areas that you're like, okay, these kind of fit this criteria. I think that they could have the potential for deer to get older in these areas. Now, what are you looking for on the actual property? And this goes for leases or private land too. So I would love to be able to have a deer feeding and bedding on the property. And that's kind of an ultimate situation, and it doesn't happen. Most of the time, it doesn't happen on public land, but let's take leases, for example. If you get a field lease, and by that, like the whole thing is a field pretty much, and there's not any woods on it, say there's just some fence lines, and there's some little swaley spots, and maybe like a small little puddle or a pond or something like that, you're looking at those spots for cover and potential spots for big bucks to bed. And it's highly likely that they will bed there, because bucks love those little out-of-the-way spots. So if you do have those spots, it's like money, because now you're taking something that most people are overlooking, which is just a field, but it has food. So now you're having a spot that you have food on the property, which is a huge pull. Gives you great late season hunting, because unless they till it under, like, you could have amazing late season hunting compared to hunting public somewhere. And then 2, you've got, bedding. If you can just find little bitty pockets or fence lines or anything that will hold bucks. Sometimes it means that the corn has to be up, and it'll just hold them when the corn's up, and then the corn gets cut and they're out of there. Whatever the situation is, if you can find that spot where you can just find a field and it's got some cool topography things on it, that is huge, because then you can get them bedding and feeding on your property, and you can get some sick opportunities. And that's where I'm getting these sheds from. It's spots like that. There's fence lines that these bucks are bedding on. There's little swales, little ponds, and little pockets of cover, and it's holding bucks. And a lot of times those big chunks of timber that are getting hunted, they're not always hanging out in them as much as you would think. And so with public land, a lot of times you don't really have that ag on public, obviously, unless there's like some DNR planted food plot, which I would never hunt because everybody hunts those. So on public land, you're looking more on the cover side, and you're just trying to get close to ag, because the closer you are to ag, in my opinion. Just the higher the deer density, more potential that you're going to have a buck that's in your area that's working and stuff. So I try to get tight to ag, and then I'm looking for like holding cover on the public, and it can just be a little bitty pocket of thick, nasty stuff, or it can be a clear cut. Clear cuts are kind of hit and miss in my opinion, because a lot of guys will target them. So if it's a clear cut that's being targeted, obviously it might not be any good. But you're looking for just like little out of the way pockets. And a lot of times on public land, what I found is you're finding these areas that look good, and then you have to go and actually walk them, because a lot of times the spots where these big bucks like to bed are spots that don't actually show up on a map. Like you can't visually see this cover change or this thicket that's there, and until you go there and you walk it and you see the buck sign, then you're like, oh shoot, there's a buck bedding here, or there's a buck that's worked through here. And usually those end up being the best spots. But you're looking for, some sort of holding cover where even if a buck's not even bedding on the public and he's just bedding on the private, that he wants to go and potentially hang out in that spot in bed. Because if he doesn't do that, like, you're not going to get much of a crack at him. You need to have him pull into that public and bed somewhere on it. Or at the very worst, he's just traveling through and you find a travel corridor where he's traveling through. But in my experience, you kind of need to have a little thick bedding spot where, yes, he'll travel through, but, well, what are you doing? No. Where he'll travel through, but maybe it'll hold some does or something like that, and he'll stay in there for a little bit, because you got to be able to hunt them somehow. But that's kind of what I'm looking for on the public, and obviously it has to be away from human pressure, but that is what it is. It's whatever that it ends up being, because everybody wants to explain that whole thing away in their own terms, and really it just matters what are the hunters doing in that spot, because there might be a bunch of diehard hunters and they're all using river access to get into these spots. Well, guess what? Now those river access spots aren't all that great anymore, but sometimes there's a little pocket that's pretty freaking close to the road and it's just getting overlooked, and that's where that little pocket of cover is, where those big bucks are frequenting and stuff. So you just kind of have to walk it with public, unfortunately. There's not a real shortcut to it, but that's what I look for on public. And with leases, honestly, if I had unlimited monies, then I would look more at some of the big leases that have all the cover and everything. But a lot of times what I end up getting stuck with, I wouldn't say stuck with, but what I end up targeting is just areas that look like nothing, and they're cheap. Because I'm looking at it and I'm going, all right, this is actually affordable. I could probably get this lease if I really wanted to. And but do I see there being any potential of a buck being in this spot or needing to travel through the spot? So that's when you start to look at the surrounding properties, and with public land too. So I'm looking obviously for big parcels, but then I'm looking for like ground blinds, tower blinds. Like, I just passed up on a lease not that long ago, and it was affordable. It had ag, and it even had a bunch of trail cam pictures from the previous guy that had leased it of a bunch of big bucks. And I was like, well, man, like, what a good spot, and maybe me 2 years ago would have got it. But what I realized is, by looking at it on Onyx, there was this bunch of maybe like 40-acre chunks that butted up to it. And each one of them seemed like they were getting hunting pressure. One of them had a box blind on it, another had a box blind and a food plot on it. And so what I realized real fast is there's a lot of competition that is going to be going after these deer. So, like, how reliable are they really going to be as far as where they're bedding and what they're doing? And even if I do get them on my spot pretty consistent, the chances of them getting shot are pretty dang high. So I had that going against me. And then the other thing that I had going against me was that there was a road on one side, and on the other side of the road was a bunch of houses and like kind of development area. And the road's not necessarily a bad thing, and you can even find areas that have roads on multiple sides. But what is on the other side of that road? Because deer will cross roads at night, obviously. So I don't really pay much attention to that, because they could easily hop from bedding area to bedding area overnight and cross roads. But is there something over there to draw them to cross that road? Because if there is, and you have, say you're sandwiched between two different neighboring properties and both of them have superb bedding, and you have the ag and you've got a little fence line and a little bit of pockets of cover, well, guess what? You're in a money hole, because these deer are going to be going back and forth all the time. And when they're doing that, they're going to be running that fence line, and they might be holding up in these little pockets of cover on your spot. So the neighboring properties are very important when it comes to looking for, what kind of leases to get or what kind of private land to target. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of what I'm looking for. Yeah, I think it's become way more important to me than it used to be, because I used to not really pay very much attention to proximity from cities or parcel size, or like trying to take into consideration deer travel and like, am I really going to get much pass through traffic? Like, do the deer really want to walk through my property? Because if you get a property that's like, okay, cool, it looks all great on the map and everything, but like, you got to understand, deer are not going to just sit on your property the whole time. Like a lot of bucks have a huge radius. Even in, early season, sometimes they'll have like a 2-3 mile radius, and they'll be, walking a big loop, and they'll be bedding in a different spot every other day. And your farm needs to be within that loop somewhat. And if you look at your spot and you're like, well, looks all great, like it's got some cover, it's got some bedding spots and yada yada, but it's sandwiched up next to this giant river, or it's sandwiched up next to this highway, or it's sandwiched up next to, a bunch of houses and a development. Well, it's like, okay, well, they're not going to be going across your property and heading in that direction. So you just cut off a giant line of travel. So you have to be really sure that they're of the direction they do want to travel, and if they're going to be, going through your property very much. I think that's pretty important. Otherwise, you can end up wasting a lot of time. There's even some small properties that I hunt, and they're just not all that great for bucks, because the bucks can't go from A to B. Like it's kind of off of the beaten trail, if you were to imagine a buck highway, and along his highway he has all of these different stops. He's got a gas station, a hotel, like all this stuff, and he's stopping in for a bite here, and he's sleeping here, and that's kind of his route, and he's always on this highway, and he's only traveling at night. Like I heard the only traveling at night part from this podcast, and I was like, man, that's such a smart idea. So it's like, well, are you going to get him when he's eating? Are you going to get him where he's sleeping? Are you going to get him in between? And preferably you're getting him somewhere where he's doing all three to some degree. And so if your property is not up along some sort of a major spot where bucks are going through it for a reason, then it's like, I don't know. I'd be really nervous to get a property like that. So that's my kind of take on looking for stuff on pressured states. And I will say, have a little bit of faith when you're trying to find, trying to get permission on private, or you're trying to find a lease, because you're taking a gamble. Like, you don't have any history on that spot. Like both the leases that I got, I never even walked them. I just looked on Onyx. I looked on Google Earth to check for deer trails and cover stuff that I can find on Google Earth. And I made a decision, and I got the lease. And I took a gamble on both of them. Both of them seemed to be way better than I was even expecting them to be. And so I think that there is a lot that you can learn and kind of come up with pretty accurate hypothesis about how that place is going to hunt based off of where it's at, near the population, parcel size, cover, crops, all that kind of stuff. And because if you're asking for permission, it's more of a risk, in my opinion, to ask for permission doing this kind of stuff than it is to lease. Only because with a lease, a lot of times, if it goes well, you have the ability to renew it, and you can kind of keep the ball rolling over and over. Whereas with permission, you don't really have any skin in the game. They don't really have any skin in the game. It's just kind of like, oh, you're being a nice person, or you're hopefully you can get some of your skin in the game and help them out with something or do something where it's like you're valuable to them and they don't want to just give permission to somebody else. But I feel like it's way more easier to lose permission than it is to lose a lease, at least where I'm at. But when you're looking for private land to ask for permission for, it's like, man, like what if you ask for permission on this spot and you get it and you're like jacked and you're like, this spot should be money, and then you walk into it and it's not. And I think that's what's kind of motivated me. Like I really enjoy if you're trying to get into hunting more private, like if you were stuck like me and you only had, pretty much public to hunt, then cool. Like you learn the public game. The public game is very much based off intel here and now. And like, is that buck in there or not? Because they're just constantly moving through. They're not always holding up in these spots because of pressure, because of lack of cover, because of whatever. And so it's a very much in the right place at the right time type of game. And if you do it long enough, then you realize that and you start to get better at it. But with the private land thing, you have way more, in your control. But it is still that gamble. So I guess I'm hoping that this kind of helps you think through your next acquisition, if you will, before you do it. And I will say too, like if you're thinking about getting a farm, like buying a farm, I know that's a dream of mine eventually, is to have my own deer hunting farm, like have my own 100 acres or something like that. And it's probably most hunters' dream to have a farm. I will say though, knowing what I know now and having leased these 2 properties, and it's only 2. It's just off of what I've learned off of these 2 leases. I'm learning that this is a whole nother ball game. Like when you're talking about private land and guessing on if it's going to be good or not, like it's almost its own thing where you're trying to make these educated guesses and then you're going in and seeing how accurate you were on your guesses. And I think it's really important to do that and get good at it and develop a lot of repetition doing it before you even go and contemplate getting a farm. Because that would, in my opinion, would be the worst case scenario, is that you don't know any of this and that you're just like, I want to have my own place, and you go and you buy this farm because it looks good and it does not produce and it doesn't hunt the way you wished it would and it doesn't have the big deer in it that you were hoping it did, and you try to grow them and the neighbors shoot them and yada yada yada. And it's like, you can imagine with me, like I can definitely imagine having this situation where you just have this nightmare farm because land's so expensive, especially here in Michigan, and it's not really that great of a big buck state, honestly. Like there's a lot of other better places to go hunt. And so the idea of buying a deer farm here in Michigan is very scary, in my opinion. It terrifies me a lot. That's another thing I would definitely do, is get your feet wet with getting permission and figuring out like how good of a guesser you are. And same thing with leases. Nice thing with leases is, in my experience, is that I don't have to go knock on these doors and I can immediately decide if I want the thing or not. And I love doing that because I hate the concept of trying to convince somebody to let me go hunt their spot and then making a decision of whether I think it's good or not. You can just imagine the conversation, me walking up to this door and being like, man, hey, how you doing? Like, I just wondering if you allow, deer hunting on your property. I'd really love to, try to get a nice deer. I've seen a lot of nice deer on your property. I'd be willing to help you out, around the house or around the farm, and just getting to know them and all this stuff. And you develop this relationship, and then you're like, okay, finally I'm in, all right, what's the first step? And then you go out there and you're scouting around and you're like, man, there's just not a lot of buck sign out here. And then you put up some stands anyway, and then you just don't have a great season. You don't see as many bucks as you were hoping. They're not all that big. And and then you're stuck with this relationship that you feel like you have to keep going, but then you kind of want to still keep permission because it's like, well, I don't have that many spots to hunt. It's like, oh man, So in my experience and opinion, I say that a lot, but I think leases are way quicker to get in and get out. Try it, drop the money, figure out if you made a good decision or not. And if you didn't, then you're out and you try for something the next year. And eventually, if you do that enough, you'll end up with some leases, hopefully, that are really good. Or you'll just learn by trial and error, and you'll be like, okay, well, that was a dumb decision. That lease wasn't any good. Sometimes they do give you a trial period where it's like they give you temporary permission to go walk this lease and look at it. But in my experience, if you want to get a good lease, they go really fast. Like the last two that I looked at were leased up within 20 minutes of going live. One of them was leased up within probably 10 minutes. So they went really fast. There's no way that you would be able to go inspect those properties and walk them. So that's when your skill of reading maps and all that stuff comes in really handy. So hopefully this was a good non-visual mapping and property oriented episode. I tried to explain everything in my head as best I could, but I freaking love this. This is probably my favorite thing ever, which is taking a piece of property, analyzing it through Onyx and Google Earth and all that stuff, and coming up with an opinion about it, and then going and verifying it. Because it's every time that you do it, it's like a skill that you're sharpening. It's like a knife that you're just sharpening over and over. And every time you do it, that knife's just a little bit sharper. And then the next time that you do it, it just slices a little bit faster and a little bit cleaner. And you just look at that property and you're like, bam, like, yeah, that'd be a good one, or nope. And all of a sudden you become crazy good at deciding whether these properties are good or not. And man, that makes things easier for you, because not only does that help things out a ton when it comes to finding properties for yourself, but you can start helping your buddies, if they've got properties they're considering, and you can, hopefully give them good advice. And also, you're going to be like way far ahead of the game when it comes to trying to find a farm that would be good for deer hunting. And you'll be able to know exactly what to look for, and you'll probably be some sort of off-market deal, or, something that you'll have to grab that, maybe the average person wouldn't know about or something. But at least I feel like you are way farther along in the smarts category. It's almost, in my opinion, it's a skill that's very similar to what I learned when I started hunting public land, which is, learning how these bucks are coming through and deer beds and all that stuff. Like all that stuff Dan Infalt teaches, super good stuff. And it's almost a skill like that you're learning, but it's with private land, and it's with analyzing it based off of the neighbors, based off of geographical location, based off of the cover and the surrounding food availability, based off everything. And you're trying to figure out, like, okay, do I have a very good shot in getting the type of deer that I hope I can get out of here. And I think the next step for me right now, I've been really focused in on Michigan a lot, and I might end up with a small handful of leases that me and some buddies go in on, and we just kind of hunt them every year, and they produce well for us. And between that and public, that's probably my goal, my thing on Michigan. But my next goal is going to be start doing this analyzation with out-of-state leases, and trying to get a crazy good deal on a lease out of state that will produce big. And I've seen a bunch of them that are pretty dang affordable, especially in Illinois. I don't know if you're looking at leases very much, but I see a ton of them pop up in Illinois, probably because the population's so low over there in some of those areas. Obviously, Chicago is like packed, but central western Illinois is just hardly anybody out there. Tons and tons of ag. So you get a lot of these leases popping up, and it's just ag, and they're going for really cheap. But it's like, man, is there just that not, like, people just don't know that big bucks are, that they live in bean fields, they live in corn fields, that they're bedding on these fence lines. Like, some of these spots could be legit. And I think some of them are little diamonds in the rough, like little spots that you could end up snagging, and for, $800, you have a spot that you could be pulling a 150s out every year, every other year, very likely. But we'll see. That'll be down the road for sure. I really do like pursuing Michigan stuff though right now, mainly because I get to go shed hunt. I still can't believe I found this matching set. That's so freaking cool. So stoked. But hopefully you guys are getting out there and enjoying the weather, and maybe doing some shed hunting. Maybe if your spots, some spots just aren't great wintering spots, and I totally get that. I've walked so many spots that just your chance of finding sheds in them are second to none. So I totally get that. But this is probably the best time to go out there and do all of your deer chores. I mean, like literally all of them. Get them all done right now. Like if you're gonna move a stand, or you're thinking about it, or you were like, man, I think, this spot needs a little bit of trimming, a little bit of adjustment. Do it now, because the worst time to do it is right before the season, and the second worst time to do it is like towards the end of the velvet growing season. Because the longer period of time that you can give those bucks with no stress, no human intrusion, the better. Like plan your entrances out. Like if you got to go in there with a machete or a weed whip and clear some trails so that you're in there silently, so that you're not putting a lot of scent on the weeds and the bushes, go do all that right now. And that'll save you so much time. If you're hunting public land, obviously you can't go and do all that kind of trimming. But like now's the time to do all your scouting, put on those miles, find those fifth and sixth options where you need to start running cameras to see if they're any good. Sign just pops right now, especially on sunny days. I've realized sunny days are the way to go. It was pretty sunny this morning, and I had some glasses on. I don't know if this is a thing or if this is just my imagination, but I had these glasses on and they have a blue mirror on them, and everything obviously makes everything really warm colored, but it just seemed like it helped these antlers pop. Like the color of the corn, a corn stalk and an antler is very similar. So trying to find antlers and cut corn can be super, super hard. But for whatever reason, it seemed like those sunglasses were helping me a lot. Like it was distinguishing the color of the corn. It was cutting down on all that light glare off the corn, so I could just see the corn and see it as more of just a bland color. And then these antlers were popping, and a lot better than they were without them. So that might be a little tip for you. Plus rubs and everything show up way better if it's dry out and if it's sunny. You can spot them so much better. I went out one time in the rain in early spring, tried to do a little bit of scouting, and I was like, where's all the rubs? They're gone. And I just didn't realize that once in the rain, like it darkens all that bright white tissue, tree tissue or whatever it is that gets exposed, when they rub on them. So dry days, sunny days, that's the way to go. Plus it just keeps you in good spirits, You get to go out and enjoy the weather and all that. So yeah, we'll catch you guys in the next one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are, and we'll see you later.